Oh, hi, Sam. I think we can begin the webinar. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, so we are ready to begin. So once again, thank you for taking time to attend this growth mindset webinar presented by Mr. James Anderson in partnership with the Principals Academy. My name is Samuel. I'm an educator from Singapore, and I will be your host for this afternoon. I can see we have with us today, we have participants from all over, Australia, Brunei, China, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Oman, Philippines, Thailand. I see people introducing themselves in the chat room already. And of course, we have a lot of people from Singapore as well. So what's going to happen is at the end of the session, we will have about 15 minutes for Mr. Anderson to answer questions from the floor. Type in your questions in the chat box and we will try to get to the questions as far as we can. So type your name and where you're from and your question. I'm going to introduce our speaker, Mr. James Anderson. He is a speaker and author and educator who is passionate about helping educators develop more thoughtful students. Originally a teacher himself and a school leader for the past 20 years, James has been working with schools to make classrooms more thoughtful places. He challenges teachers to think deeply about their own mindsets and how their beliefs are communicated to students in often subtle but unintended ways. So without much further ado, I'm going to hand the time over to James to share with us about the growth mindset. Over to you, James.
Thanks, Samuel. And thanks to everyone for coming along this afternoon. It's a Friday afternoon and I do value and appreciate your time. Of course, we're here to talk about Carol Dweck's work. Many of you will have seen this book. And the work we're talking about today is really based all around several decades worth of research that Professor Dweck talks about in this book. And it's funny because I recently heard this book described as one of the most unread books on people's bookshelves. And I think it's true that many people pick up Carol Dweck's book and they go, it's really important. I've heard all this stuff about growth mindsets. I need to find out more. They read the back cover and they go, that's kind of interesting. They read the first chapter and they go, oh, yep, I get that. They start the second chapter and go, yeah, I think this is more of the same. I understand this, and they put it down. And that's a real problem because Carol Dweck's idea around fixed and growth mindset, it's a really simple idea. It's really easily understood, but it's far more complicated than that. And this is the issue we've been having, that in schools, in social media, we've picked up the essence of Carol Dweck's work. And we said, this is great. Let's go out and teach this to kids because it's so important. But it turns out that actually implementing growth mindsets, making a difference to students' mindsets is really quite hard. And Carol Dweck said this herself just last year. She pointed out that growth mindsets is even more complex than she imagined. In the beginning, we didn't recognize the complexity of implementation. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. It's the implementation part, about why it's so hard to get this right, because we've had 5 or 10 years now of trying to change students' mindsets, and the research is in. Most of what we're doing in schools and in classrooms isn't having an impact on student learning outcomes. The sorts of strategies you're probably familiar with from social media, the posters, the not yets, the praise efforts, they're not having the impact we'd like them to have. And I'd like to start just with this thought. We know mindsets are important and we want to make a difference to students' mindsets to help them develop a more growth-orientated mindset. And I was rereading Carol's book earlier this year and something struck me. And I want to put this idea in your head to think about as we go through this next hour. In just the first chapter of this book, Carol Dweck uses about 10 examples of really well-known people with fixed mindsets and another 10 with growth mindsets. And the question I want you to think about is not a single one of them had read her book before Carol Dweck wrote about them. Not a single one of them had a lesson about growth mindsets. They'd never seen a poster that said, this is fixed, this is growth, do that. Not one of them had been surrounded with messages of not yet. So my question for you to hold in your mind as we go through this session today is, where did those people get their mindset from? Because that's the sort of process that we need to emulate if we're going to make a difference to students' mindsets. So let's start off here and talk about what Carol Dweck says in her book, Mindsets. Essentially what she talks about is, she talks about these two ways of viewing yourself. Like there's two types of people in the world. Now, clearly there are not two types of people in the world, but we're going to pretend like there are for a little while. And what she talks about is, she says, someone with a fixed mindset, they see the world like this. Hey, look at me. What you see is kind of what you get. There are some things I'm good at, just always being good at them. Other things that I struggle at, some things I'll just never be able to do. That music stuff, I'm just not very musical. Those sorts of ideas. And this person will say, the person standing here today is pretty much the same person that will be standing here in 5 years' time, because this is just who I am. And when you see yourself like that, this is me, get used to it, you tend to spend your life looking inwards. You ask yourself, who am I? What abilities do I have? And as a result of discovering the answer to that question, working out who you are, you've then got to work out where you fit in the world. Because frankly, I'm not very much like you, so I could never do what you do, but I'm a little bit like these other people, so I could sort of do maybe what they do. On the other hand, someone with a growth mindset sees the world very, very differently. They see the world like this. Hey, look at me. What you see is just who I happen to be today. I change, not just a little bit, I change a lot. I change some of my most basic characteristics, my talents, my abilities, my intelligence. It's all up for grabs. The person standing here today, a shadow of the person who will be standing here in 5 years' time, because I get on with the business of changing myself. And when you see yourself like that, this is me today, but I change, you don't spend your life looking inwards, asking who am I and where do I fit. You spend your life looking outwards, asking who do I want to become and what do I need to do to become that person. And that difference, the difference between look inwards, discover your abilities and work out where you fit, and look outwards, choose who you want to become and do something about becoming that person, underscores the key difference between a fixed and a growth mindset. And that is the idea of choice. It's not that someone with a fixed mindset makes bad choices. They just don't see the choice in the first place. So that's the mindset. In an essence, in a moment, we could say that's it and finish the webinar. Someone with a fixed mindset believes I can't change. Someone with a growth mindset says I can change. And as a result of holding those ideas in your head, right? That's all it is, an idea in your head. There's some ways you behave. Because you believe this, you act this way. So let me show you how you might behave. Someone with a fixed mindset will avoid a challenge. And why wouldn't you? For someone with a fixed mindset, a challenge is just an opportunity to fail. Sure, it might be hard, but if it's hard and you can't do it today, you won't be able to do it tomorrow or the next day, and everyone will know where your limits are. So much, much better for you to say, yes, I could do that, but I won't. Because if you do it and fail, people will know where your limits are. People with a fixed mindset will give up easily. And again, why wouldn't you? For someone with a fixed mindset, things that are hard today are going to be hard tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. Can I have a quick show of hands as I look over here to your lovely faces? Who's ever found something hard in their life, felt like they've struggled? Yeah, I'm seeing lots of hands. How would you like to feel like that every day? Of course not. So for the person with a fixed mindset, your life becomes about the path of least resistance. As soon as things get hard, you say, oh, that's not for me. If it was for me, it would be easy. So I'll put that aside and try something else instead. These people see effort as a bad thing, a bad thing. Now, this is worth talking about for a moment, because a lot of the social media work around growth mindsets will say, praise effort, praise effort, praise effort. Why would you praise someone for something they think is bad? You see, when you say great effort, good to see you working so hard, to a student with a fixed mindset, they hear you must be stupid or you wouldn't have to work so hard. Oops. See, some of this stuff we've picked up on social media has actually backfired on us. And we'll talk more about effort a little bit later on, but I'll say it right now. This is not an effort mindset. It is a growth mindset. And if the sort of effort you're putting in is not leading to growth, it's not because you're not capable of the growth. It's because you're putting in the wrong sort of effort. But very often we see this in a school or a classroom. We see a student involved in this sort of effort. I call that the constipation version of effort. But what do we hear? We hear someone say, good work, great, keep up the hard work. Good to see the effort from you today. It's a shame you're not learning anything. But as long as you're trying your hardest, that's okay. Can I suggest that's one of the most damaging things we can say to a child? As long as you're trying your hardest, that's okay. What's the message behind that? We both know the work's not up to standard, but you've put everything into it. Better get used to not being able to get up to the standard then. Someone with a fixed mindset will ignore your feedback, not because you're not helpful or you're not nice, just because they don't see it as useful. If they could do it, they would have done it. So your feedback doesn't help them. And they're threatened by the success of other people. Everything somebody else can do just makes me look bad. So I'll cut them down, I'll make excuses and do those sorts of things. See, someone with a fixed mindset believes being comes before the doing. They've got to look inside themselves and ask, have I got mathematical abilities before they'll do the maths? And I think you've probably heard students say this to you before. Have you ever had a student come up to you and say, Miss, do you think I'll be good at this? Who's had that sort of question? Looking down at who's had that question from a student? What they're asking you is, can you tell me I've already got the abilities and take away any risk of failure? And these students think that learning, school, is about discovering their abilities. They're trying to work out who they are, what they can do. So they come into your classroom and they wonder if they're going to be able to do what you're asking them to do. On the other hand, someone with a growth mindset, someone who sees themselves as capable of change, sees the world very, very differently. These students will embrace a challenge. They love a challenge. Don't waste my time with easy stuff. Give me hard stuff, thing that's going to help me grow and develop. These students are more persistent because they understand that things that are hard today are going to be easy tomorrow. Someone with a fixed mindset sees hard, harder, really hard, impossible. Someone with a growth mindset sees hard, easy, hard, easy. It doesn't get harder and harder and harder. It's just always the next step, the bit of struggle that makes something easy. These students see effort as a good thing. Praise these students for their effort all day, every day. In fact, if you try to praise them for their standard, great assignment to you today, they're likely to turn around to you and say, yeah, I know, but did you see what I had to do to get there? Did you see the work I put in? Because they understand that their standard is temporary, that their best is only their best when they measure by yesterday's standards. by tomorrow's standards, it's going to be their second best. So they're not particularly interested in what they've just done, what they've just produced. They're more interested in what they did to get there and being reassured that doing more of that will get them to the next level. These students learn from your feedback. They're the first ones with their hands up. They're the first ones saying, "Miss, can you help me, please? Sir, can you answer my question?" Because they know they're not meant to understand it. They're not trying to discover their abilities. They don't have the abilities. But they've got a teacher who's there to help them develop those abilities. So they want your feedback. And they love the success of other people. Everything somebody else does just reassures them that that's something they could do if they put their mind to it. When I see you achieve and you achieve and you achieve, I don't want to do what you do, but I know that you started where I'm starting, without those talents, without those abilities, without that intelligence. And you did to become the person you are today. So when I want to become this person over here, I'm going to have to do the same sorts of things. These students understand that becoming comes before being. They don't ask themselves, have I got the abilities? Am I a leader? They say, I would love to be a leader. Can someone teach me how to do that, please? And they recognize that learning is about creating new abilities. That at the other side of the class, at the other side of the course, at the other side of the degree, they're not the same person that entered the course, entered the degree. That they're a new person who's changed, that can do new things, things they couldn't do before. Let's turn that off for a second. Someone with a growth mindset understands what George Bernard Shaw told us many, many years ago, that life isn't about finding yourself, that life is about creating yourself. But how often do we hear that I'm trying to work out who I am, trying to discover what I'm good at? How often do we hear that sort of message from people, that I'm trying to figure out what I can do, rather than saying, I can't do what I want to do. How do I become the person who can? And someone with a fixed mindset loves a personality test. Like, how many of you, and I'm going to glance over at my screen again to see some hands, how many of you have ever been the victim of a personality test? Yeah, you've taken the test and the test has said you're a red box with an RQ, less than whatever it is that tells you. And the testers gladly said to you that, oh, you're one of those. So you're cut out for, you're suited for this, this, and this, but you won't be very good at that. Now, there's nothing wrong with personality tests and these sorts of measures. It's the message that comes with it. If the message is that you're one of these, so you can do these limited things, but not these ones, then it sends a very, very fixed message to the person taking the test. If, on the other hand, the message is one of, these are your current abilities, what do you want to do? What choices do you want to make? What sort of person do you want to become? Oh, well, you don't have those abilities yet. So you'll need to develop these abilities before you can do that well. Very, very different approach. Now, obviously, big difference between the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. Quick question for you, and again, I'm going to look over the screen here. Which would you prefer? Students with a fixed mindset or students with a growth mindset? Wave your hand round if you'd like students to have growth mindsets. Absolutely. Isn't it obvious? Unfortunately, it's not as easy as going into your classroom tomorrow. Actually, don't go into your classroom tomorrow. It's Saturday. Go in on Monday. It's not as easy as going into your classroom, putting up a poster that says, this is a fixed mindset, this is a growth mindset. Can you do that, please? But most of the current interventions, that's what it boils down to. Don't say you can't. No. Say you can't yet. I hope we've all worked out the problem with not yet. You see, when you say not yet, and that's all you do to a student, you're making a promise to them that they will eventually be able to do it. A problem, though, is that very often that not yet in a week, a month, a term, has turned into still not yet. And what the student actually experiences is not growing. And two things have happened when that happens. First off, you've broken a promise. You told them they'd grow, just they couldn't do it yet. And now they've lost trust in you. And secondly, they haven't achieved the growth we wanted them to achieve. There's nothing wrong with saying not yet. But when you listen closely to Carol Dweck's famous TED talk about the power of yet, what she says is that the power of yet is that it gives you a pathway into the future. It doesn't tell you how to travel that path. So, fixed mindset, growth mindset, these ideas that live in our head. If we are going to change mindsets, then what we need to focus on is how we change beliefs. It's not a matter of changing language. It's not a matter of changing anything else about the student. What it's about is changing what they believe, what they understand to be true in their mind. And in this session today, I'm going to outline some of the key parts about how we go about changing those beliefs. Because the posters that some of you will have seen, the don't say this type posters, the change your words, change your mindset poster, it gets the message exactly back to front. You don't change your words to change your mindset. You change your mindset and then your words will change. So what we need to focus on is how to change that belief. Before we get there though, I do want to clear up one big misunderstanding about this work. And this is it. Fixed mindset, as I said, this is me, get used to it, I don't change very much. Growth mindset, this is me today, but I can change. It's an idea that lives in your head. That's it. I'm going to say this again. A growth mindset is an idea that lives in your head. What it is not is the growth. All right, the growth mindset is not the growth. It's just the idea that the growth is possible. And when we look at this, what we need to understand is that a growth mindset tells you, I can grow. It's the invitation. It's not the growth. And if we come back to Carol Dweck's book, it's really interesting to note that first chapter, don't have to go past the first chapter. The first chapter lists lots and lots of people with fixed mindsets who have achieved enormous amounts of growth. You don't need a growth mindset to grow. It helps, don't get me wrong, it helps, but you don't need it. More importantly for us as educators, there are an awful lot of people in the world, students in particular, with growth mindsets that fail to achieve the growth. Because all a growth mindset tells you is I can grow. It does not tell you how to achieve that growth. And that is an absolutely critical point to recognize. If we're going to help students actually achieve greater growth, we need to go beyond this idea of just teaching the mindset part and actually teach them how to grow. So in my work, in my work, I talk about this idea of learning agility. And what learning agility is it's someone who understands they're capable of growth, but also understands how to go about achieving the growth. The bottom of the diagram here is obviously Carol Dweck's work. And I put it on the bottom not because it's the least important, but because it's the foundation. It's our starting point. It's the bit you really need because it gets you up and acting. But if you don't act in the right way, you don't achieve the growth. That's why I combine it with our posture and benefits work around habits of mind, and also the work of Anders first three which you need to go in order to achieve that growth. It's not until you put those three together that you actually achieve the growth. And the thing that I love about these three ideas is that they're not good ideas. They're not dreamt up. What Carol Dweck, Art Koster and Bennett Kalick and Anders Ericsson all did was to go out and observe people in the real world, what they were actually doing to achieve the growth. And that's what I write about in my other book, The Agile Learner. And one of the free handouts you're getting at the end of the session today when you fill out the feedback form is the first chapter of this book to give you a sense of what learning agility is all about. Let's do that. The point here is that a growth mindset only works when you do the work. And for that matter, only when you do the right sort of work. You know, we hear a lot of stuff about, you know, positive affirmations and believing in yourself and all that sort of stuff. What we've got to remember is that you do not believe your way to success. Success takes actions. And in particular, it takes a very precise set of actions, a set of behaviours that Art Koster and Bennett Kalick described as habits of mind, and also a process described by Anders Ericsson. When you get those three things together, you actually achieve the growth. Beliefs are important. They get you up and doing something, but you've got to do the right something. These sorts of affirmations, you know, believe and you can achieve, only tell you half the story. The other half of the story, it's believe and you'll act. If you're told you can't do this, you're not that sort of person, you don't act in the first place. But if you believe you can achieve, you act. And when you act effectively, you'll achieve. Now I'm looking at all of your lovely faces, and I'm seeing some people who look like they're screenshotting some of these things. As one of the handouts at the end of the day, and you're welcome to screenshot, don't get me wrong, as one of the handouts, you get a copy of all my slides as well. So you're not going to miss out on anything you see today. All right, so we've got these two mindsets, fixed mindset, growth mindset, ideas that live in your head that lead you to make choices about your actions. I was talking to a group of principals and educators recently, and it was pointed out that it's not just kids with mindsets. Adults have mindsets as well. And in fact, teachers have mindsets. And teachers' mindsets are really important. For example, a teacher with a fixed mindset will quickly look at all their students and judge that this is a really bright one, they'll get good marks. This one here, I'll settle for a C. And I might need to talk to that one because I don't think she's really cut out for my subject. In the staff room, this is where it gets interesting. In the staff room, where a fixed mindset teacher will look at another teacher who's doing a really good job in their school, but they'll start making excuses about why they're not doing it. You know, they've got the easy class, haven't they? Anybody could teach their class. Come and work with my class. They're the really difficult ones. And a first-year teacher, imagine a first-year teacher comes up to the fixed mindset teacher and the fixed mindset teacher goes, so, you chose to be a teacher, did you? Are you sure that's a wise choice? You see, not everyone's cut out for, listen to the language, not everyone is cut out for or suited to being a teacher, just special people like me. And look, you'll know, if you struggle in the first few weeks of teaching, you're probably not meant to be it. So better to get out rather than suffer through all that hardship that's in front of you. The last thing I want to do as a fixed mindset teacher is to support this teacher because they might end up being better than me. So I don't want to see that happen because they make me look bad. On the other hand, a teacher with a growth mindset will come into their classroom and behave very differently. They'll look at all the students and go, great, we're all at different starting points. That's to be expected. but we've all got so far to go. There's nothing stopping any of you reaching the heights of expertise here. I'm going to work with all of you equally in the same way because I expect you all to grow and develop and change. And by the time you finish with me this year, you've got much, much more of your journey to go. So let's just get on with it. When I walk into the staff room as a growth mindset teacher, I'm going up to that highly talented, highly experienced teacher and saying, "Mate, you're fantastic at this job. I've seen what you do. I don't know how you do it. Can you come into my classroom and watch me as I try to do what I've seen you do and tell me what I'm doing wrong?" See, I don't feel less because of that experienced teacher's abilities. I feel blessed because I have the opportunity to learn from them. And that first year teacher, when I'm talking to that first year teacher, I'm looking at them going, "Welcome to the profession. Don't let anybody tell you this is easy. This is hard work, and everybody makes mistakes in the beginning. I can't tell you what mistakes you're going to make, but when you do, feel free to ask anybody here. They'll help you and you'll get past them. But I tell you what I can tell you. I can tell you what went wrong in my first year so you don't make those mistakes." Again, I don't feel threatened by someone who's entering the profession that might end up being a very, very talented teacher. I feel blessed for the opportunity to help them in their journey. So I was talking to this group of teachers about these different responses as a fixed mindset teacher or a growth mindset teacher. And I asked them all, and I'll ask you now, just as I'm looking at the screen over here, just a quick show of hands. How many of you have got a fixed mindset? Oh, look, I can't see a single hand being raised. Isn't that strange? But you see what we've done? We've told you you've got a choice of two: fixed mindset, growth mindset. This one's bloody awful. And as a result, everybody has said, well, I clearly haven't got that one. I must have this one instead. And the trouble with that is that once you say you have a growth mindset, no further growth is necessary. And what we've done is actually stigmatized the fixed mindset. We've said it's a bad thing. In fact, this is one of my favorite posters at the moment. You might have seen this one on social media. It's got Darth Vader behind the fixed mindset and Yoda behind the growth mindset. Apparently, not only is the fixed mindset bad, it's evil as well. I mean, what are you meant to do with that? And what we've created is we've created what Carol Dweck and a colleague, Susan Mackey from here in Melbourne, talks about as being a false mindset. And a false mindset is the biggest issue with growth mindset implementation in any school setting. And what it is someone who advocates growth mindset. They'll tell you that they adopt growth mindset strategies. They may even be your growth mindset champion in your school. The person saying, we've got to do growth mindsets. But when you haven't spent the time deeply reflecting on your own mindset, what you actually do, what you actually say, the messages you send unconsciously may be delivering much more fixed messages to the students. For example, I worry, and I worry a lot about this. I worry about the number of classrooms that have adopted praise effort. And what that actually means in the classroom is to praise struggling students for effort. And what's actually happening in the classroom is you're going, great to see you working so hard. Keep up the hard work. Oh, brilliant. Well done. That's great work from you again. And when you do that, when you make it out like struggle makes up for a deficit, when you look back over your classroom practice and realize that in the last 3 or 4 weeks, all the hard questions got directed to this student, and this student, a couple of easy ones to those students. When you realize that when you talk to this student, you talk in a confident voice and you expect them to solve it. But when you talk to this student, you lower your voice and you say, That's fine if you hand it in like that. No, I'm exaggerating, but it's those messages that we send unconsciously that are the big issue. In fact, John Hattie at a conference at a visible learning conference, probably 2 years ago now, pointed out, he was presenting with Carol Dweck, pointed out the effect size of fixed versus growth mindset on student performance is about 0.19, which for those of you who don't know what that number means, it means no effect. Stop wasting your time. But he went on to say that the reason was because adults have a fixed mindset and keep treating students accordingly. So as a result, they're not changing their mindsets. And this is what it's about. How do we change mindsets? And for teachers, the critical point to recognize here is that you do not get to choose your mindset. You can't just say, I'll have one of those, thanks very much. Your mindset is part of what we call your unconscious bias. It's what's happening when you're not paying attention. It's those millions of subtle little messages that we send every day. And so to understand this, we need to understand that the number one thing you can do to change a student's mindset, what are you guessing? Is to start spending some time reflecting on your own. Because at the end of the day, the biggest influence on a student's mindset, it's not going to be the posters on the wall. It's not going to be the words you tell them to say. It's going to be the thousands of little interactions you have with them every day, every term, every year. You and the child's parents and other messages around them, that's what's going to influence the ideas that live in their heads. And so what I want to do now is introduce you to a tool to help you think differently about this work and give you a way to actually move forward without having to have a growth mindset. Some of you will have seen this diagram before. It's a diagram by Nigel Holmes. It's a great diagram. I can see some nods. Next time you see it, what I want you to do is get a pair of scissors out and I want you to cut it very carefully down the middle. Because, and I'll come back to you to say this, the fixed mindset and the growth mindset do not exist in the real world. Nobody has a fixed mindset. Nobody has a growth mindset. In reality, where we are is somewhere in the middle. Our mindset is not a flip from one to the other. It's a continuum from low growth to high growth. And in the handout that you're going to get at the end of the workshop today, I give you a copy of this mindset continuum. And what it allows you to do is to recognize that you don't have to have a growth mindset, but you don't have to have a fixed mindset either, that you can be somewhere in between. And what we're going to do is I'm going to actually, whoops, there you go. That was my first little, here we go. This way. I'm going to give you a copy of this book that outlines what the mindset continuum is all about and why it's so important. The other thing it does, for those of you who want to know the research behind some of what I've been telling you, I list it and document it and reference it in there as well. So you will get an electronic copy of this as part of the notes at the end of the session. What the continuum allows us to do, though, is to recognize that our mindsets, it destigmatizes the fixed and growth mindset. When I said to that group of teachers and school leaders, you know, how many of you have got a fixed mindset? They all went, I haven't got a fixed mindset, that would be a bad thing. When I asked them, and I'll ask you, quick show of hands, how many of you are prepared to admit you could have a more growth-oriented mindset? Who could do that? Yeah. And that's what it does. It frees us up to say, I haven't got a fixed mindset, but I don't have a growth one either. There is some work I can do. It reflects the real world. You know, we don't see two types of people in the world, those with fixed mindsets, those with growth mindsets. What we actually see are people somewhere in the continuum there. It helps us address that false mindset by making it all right to say, well, maybe I do send some fixed messages because I can see I've got some work to do. And most importantly, it allows us to recognize that this is a journey. What we've been doing, I'll do this. What we've been doing is saying, we've got to teach the topic. I want you to stop teaching mindsets. Okay, I want you to stop teaching mindsets like it's a topic. And instead of teaching about mindsets, I want to talk to you about what we need to do to teach for a growth mindset. Because as Carol Dweck points out, a growth mindset is not a declaration. It's a journey. And it is a journey as much for the students as it is for you and I. And recognizing that growth mindset is a journey allows us to do something else. And remember, this whole session is about recognizing how we go about implementing strategies that make a difference. Not the posters on the wall and change your language type strategies that we know don't, that we know don't work, but implementing strategies that do work. And what understanding the mindset as a continuum helps us recognize is that your success with growth mindsets will not be measured by the number of students with a growth mindset. See, what happened is 5 years ago, people went to a conference, someone said, this is the fixed mindset, this is a growth mindset, this is the good one. Tell your kids to have one of those. We went back into our classrooms. We said, yeah, I'll give that a go. And what happened was, after a year or so, none of the kids had a growth mindset. And we went, this doesn't work. And in schools all over the world, it became last year's initiative. Now, I'm based in Australia. You might have picked that up. I don't know if this happens in other parts of the world, but do you have other initiatives that go through every year in education? The next thing, the next thing, the next thing? Yeah, we all do it. Your success with growth mindsets is going to be measured by how much more growth-orientated students have become. Your job is not to install, adopt a growth mindset. Your job is to nurture, to nourish, to encourage an increasingly growth-oriented mindset in your students. And the way to do that, there's a couple of approaches, some that work, some that don't. To start off with, you can keep doing what you've been doing. All right, let's be clear about this, and I'll put that slide back up. But you don't get to start doing this work. You are already implementing growth mindsets in your school. Your language, your structures, your assessments, they are all sending what I call positive or negative mindset movers. The trouble is, at the moment, it's all mixed. You're sending some growth messages and some fixed messages. So what we need to do is ask the question, how do we do this better? I'll give you a quick example. In your school, sitting in the staff room, what are you more likely to hear discussion of? Are you more likely to hear discussion of discussion of students, of high achieving students, or students who are achieving highly? I'll say it again. Are you more likely to hear discussion about high achieving students or students who are achieving highly? Because the first, high achieving students, is a group, is a category, is a type of student and sends a fixed message. It asks, are you one of those or not? To describe students as students who are achieving highly makes it about what you do, not who you are. And it sends a more growth-oriented message. You can adopt the catchphrases, the not yets and believe in you can achieve. But as I've said, they send mixed messages and they're often incomplete or half-truths. You can adopt the rules, the praise effort and celebrate mistakes and those sorts of things. But again, they're not working. We know that. The research is in. What I'm going to suggest to you is you need to adopt a different set of strategies. And these are those strategies. The first, and this is what we talk about in detail during the Growth Mindset Masterclass, is to create what I call a style guide. Now, a style guide nudges you. We know as teachers, we're going to send fixed messages. And what we need is little reminders, little nudges to help us send growth messages when we might send a fixed message. So for example, here's one that echoes down to that high achieving students or students who are achieving highly. When you group students, right, we all group students every day, every year. The nudge I want you to remember is to group them by verbs, not by adjectives. So group them by what they do, not who they are. So don't talk about your music students or your high achieving students. Talk about your students who study music and your students who are achieving highly. Because every time you do that, it makes it about what you do, not who you are. Another one, when we talk about students' bests, all right, we talk about wanting them to do their best and so forth. What I want you to do is to attach a timestamp to whatever you say. Don't say that's your best work, because for someone with a fixed mindset, they think that's it. Say that's your best to date, your best so far, your best this term. It's always a point in time because I expect you to get better. That's just two. There's many of those. Ultimately, it's your mindset that we need to change. When you see the world through this growth mindset lens, you won't change your tone of voice. You won't direct your questions to some students and others. These growth mindset movers that we'll create will be natural and automatic. So when that happens, everything else follows. And from a school leadership perspective, what we also need to do is to look at the structures and systems that enable teachers to send more growth-oriented messages to their students. Now, obviously that's not easy and not something we can do in 1 hour. But what I've been trying to build to is this idea of, we thought it was going to be easy because the Carol Dweck's idea is so simple, but implementation is hard. And we get tripped up by this idea of how we change beliefs. And we get tripped up by oversimplifying Carol Dweck's work. Now what I'd like to talk to you about is actually changing those beliefs. In the 10 minutes we have left before we sort of go into questions, and if you've got questions that are bubbling away in there, feel free to type them in now. Samuel will sort of start curating them and work out which ones we can address. Carol Dweck pointed out, and we've said it already, that mindsets are just beliefs. Right? They're just ideas in your head, nothing more, nothing less. They're powerful beliefs. They're absolutely powerful, but they're just something in your mind, and you can change your mind. And I wish she hadn't said that. I really wish Carol Dweck had not said, and you can change your mind in that way, because it made it sound like changing your mind was going to be easy. It's not like deciding to go to this restaurant, or I'll have the fish instead of the chicken. The beliefs we're trying to change are some of our most basic beliefs about who we are. And they don't change because we've put a poster on the wall or we've said not yet. What we need to do is really think about how this works, because beliefs don't work, right? Beliefs don't work. If beliefs worked, I wouldn't waste my time today doing what I've done. I'd work on your belief, and we could work on something really interesting, like not belief as a teacher, but maybe your belief in your ability to fly. Wouldn't that be a good one? We could really believe in our ability to fly and then climb to the roof and throw ourselves off. It doesn't matter how much you believe in that. It's not going to be true. And so beliefs don't work. All beliefs can do is lead us to make choices about our actions. If I believe I can fly, I'll climb the steps, I'll go to the roof, I'll stand on the edge confident in my ability to fly, and I'll throw myself off fully believing that I'm going to fly off into the sunset. But once I choose my actions, I have no choice over the consequences. The consequences are governed not by my belief, but by reality. And what happens then is that those actions have consequences that I can't control. I plummet to the ground. I hopefully survive. I have an experience now that counters my belief. And when I've got this belief I can fly, but I'm actually lying on the ground with broken bones, how do you reckon that affects my beliefs? And see, this has been the issue. We've been telling students, believe me, don't say you can't, you just can't do it yet. You'll be able to do this. They've said, okay, I'll give it a go. As a result, they've given it a go, but they've acted in the wrong way. They haven't adopted the right behaviours. And as a result, what they've experienced is no growth at all. And when you've got a teacher saying, trust me, you can grow, and your lived experience is telling you you can't, who do you reckon you're going to believe? The teacher or your own lived experience? Most of our strategies have focused on developing what I would call, oops, I'll come back from there for a second. Beg your pardon. What we've been doing, most of our strategies have taught kids about the mindset. But I'll come back and ask you again, the first chapter where I started today, how did these people get their mindset when there wasn't a poster, when there wasn't a catchphrase? The way they got their mindset is, I'll go back. Sorry, I've out-technologied myself. I'm just going to go back to here. Trip myself up with my own technology. The way they got their mindset, no one told them they had to grow. They said, James, if you stretch yourself just a little bit, if you develop new behaviours to work on something more difficult, you'll be able to do this. They were taught how to grow. As a result, they experienced that growth. And when that happened, no one had to convince them that they could grow. They knew through their own lived experience. And that's why when we look at what these people had, the people that Carol Dweck originally studied, the people she talks about in her book so earnestly, what they had is what I call an authentic growth mindset. And what we've been doing in schools is a little bit more like a learned growth mindset. What we've been doing is teaching about a growth mindset instead of teaching for a growth mindset. So your 3 strategies that you're going to want to adopt, 3, not 2 or 1, 3 broad strategies to help develop a more growth-orientated mindset or an authentic growth mindset in your students. Sure, tell them about it. All right, that's the stuff we've been doing now. But you're also going to want to teach them how to grow, and you're going to want to make sure they actually experience that growth. And I reckon about 90% of our strategies at the moment have focused here. Believe me, it's true. Your brain changes, all that stuff. And it's important to keep doing that. But if we don't also teach them how to grow and recognize when they grow, ultimately their experience will be one of not growing, and all our efforts will fail. So in the Growth Mindset Masterclass, the thing we're sort of telling you about here today, the way we teach you about this process of changing those underlying beliefs, we talk about the number one growth mindset strategy, which is this idea of backstories, understanding the journey that people take to achieve their talents and abilities. We talk about the 5 truths about talent, the work of Anders Ericsson and others, explaining what it takes to go from a child who has no particular musical ability to being an adult that is extraordinary in what they can do. What did they do with their time that made them develop those abilities? We talk about the habits of mind that you need to develop to achieve that growth. We talk about effort and how it's not the time and energy, but rather focus more on efficacy, not the time you spend, but how the time is spent that matters. We talk about the process of growth and mistakes and going into your learning zone and how to stop celebrating mistakes. Can we please not do that? There's a whole piece on this, but stop celebrating mistakes. Some of our children are growing up to be pilots and surgeons, and we don't want them making mistakes. What we do want them doing, though, is stretching and challenging themselves and growing, but not the mistakes part. And we'll explore that in the course. We'll talk about that process of practice and how it changes your brain, and how when you see someone with extraordinary talents, what you're seeing is the end of a long backstory of changing the way their brain works, that they've no longer got the same brain as they had. They've got a new brain, one that's wired differently. We'll talk about learning agility. We'll talk about how to develop that style guide with those nudges, like group by verbs, not by adjectives, and attaching timestamps to performance, things like this. And importantly, we'll talk about assessment, because assessment is one of those things that really pushes a lot of fixed mindset buttons for students. Collectively, those are the types of areas that we need to understand, adopt strategies around, if we're going to have an enduring impact on students' mindset. If in a school, in a classroom, in a home, we're going to move students towards having a more growth-oriented mindset. Because as Carol Dweck said, growth mindsets is more complex than we imagined. In the beginning, we didn't recognize the complexity of implementation. This work takes a really thoughtful response. And I'd invite you to join me in the Growth Mindset Masterclass to really delve into that. It involves a series of online lessons and 4 webinars that you can find out more about. That's for the registration page. While Samuel, I think you've been ploughing through the questions. You might have some questions you want to ask. I'll let people take a snapshot of the registration page. I'll then put up the slide with the feedback form and how to get the free ebooks, the copy of the Mindset Continuum, and everything else that we've promised you during the day. So Samuel, how did you feel about the session so far?
I feel like
I hope you felt more than that.
I feel like I have a growth mindset now.
I failed.
It's been enlightening. I think there are some paradigm shifts. I think I'm one of those people who have read about it and kind of feel like, yeah, I understand it. But I think some of the things that you shared have really challenged me to look a bit deeper. We do have quite a few questions here. So just give me a moment. Let's start with one from Othman. I think this is a great one to get your input on, especially since you've been in education and you've been a school leader. So Othman is asking, what are some of the key areas in policies which schools can look at to have growth mindset at a school level? In other words, what would a school leader with a growth mindset look like to you?
Oh, that was two questions. So school policies, or what would a school leader look like? So I'll answer the first one, which I think is the policy question. School leaders, the huge responsibility here, because what you do is enable the teachers. So there's a couple of things that go on. One is about, first off, helping teachers develop a growth mindset themselves. So spending some time reflecting on some of those past beliefs that might be being communicated to the students. But I think the real essence of the question being asked is about the structures. There are two levels of structures to think about. One is around the sort of staff management, school culture structures, how we do teacher reviews. Like, for example, are teachers coming in being evaluated about the type of teacher they are, or are they being given advice about how to improve? Is it a judgment exercise or is it a growth exercise? Similarly, we send messages in terms of things like assessments, school awards, that can send messages to students as well. One really powerful one that I'll point out because we're limited time. At some point when students are 14, 15, 16 years old, somewhere in there, depending on the system you work in, and I know in Singapore we've got certain systems and other countries different systems, but at some point students are sent down different paths, down to this level of school or this type of whatever it might be. Now, we've got to do that. That's nothing unreasonable about doing that. But my question is this: when that happens, when the students get to that subject selection time or the pathway selection time, is it viewed by the student as working out which path they are suited to? As in, which type of student are you? Are you the type of student that goes down this one or this one or this one? Or is it viewed as, this is your choice. Which one would you like to go down? I'll prepare you to go down whatever path you want to go down. Because it's two very, very different approaches. When the message from the system is, I am going to judge who you are, categorize you, and as a result, limit your choices. That's a very fixed message. When it's, I understand you're a person with free will. Look, they're certainly got to be up to certain standards and things, but which pathway do you choose? Where do you want to go? And what are you doing to get there? Very, very different message that goes with each. So it's a very big question to ask, but there's some ideas to think about. One, help teachers develop a growth mindset. Two, look at the structures and culture around the school level things where you staff evaluations and that sort of stuff, but also the structures in the school that send messages to students, assessments, that sort of thing. Samuel, I'll change this because I know people want to also download the resources today. So scan that one if you want to get the free copy of the ebook and the continuum and the first chapter of my other book and a whole bunch of stuff, a copy of the slides that we're giving away today.
Great, thanks.
Samuel, was there other questions?
Yes, there is another question which I think follows on nicely from what you just shared with us. How do I, as an educator, know where I am on the spectrum? So if like you said, when you ask us, like, do I have a growth mindset? I'm going to say yes. But how do I have an accurate, how do you help an educator have a more accurate self-perception in terms of mindset?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things here. On a simple level, I would get out the continuum. I would look in detail, and you can, as you're downloading it now, you might have a chance to look at it. And I do this work with educators all the time. And we pull out the continuum and just go, typically, and it's going to vary, right? It's going to vary from context to context. But typically, what sort of behaviours do you see yourself exhibiting? Do you really embrace challenges like a growth mindset person would? Or are you more the sort of person that loves a challenge that you know you can succeed at? Or are you the sort of person that goes, I don't want anything hard, I'd much rather do something easy than do something difficult? And on that continuum, you can fairly accurately enough, understand where you fall. And when you do that, you then got to ask two questions. what experiences have I had that have left me with this set of beliefs? Why don't I want to? And then the second question is, what do I need to learn about to help me become increasingly growth oriented? And look, I'll make a point here. As a school leader, and I know there are lots of school leaders here and district leaders and others, there is, because we've stigmatized the fixed mindset, there is this real emotional response from some teachers, many people, when you start saying you haven't got a growth mindset. And very often, particularly if they find themselves towards the low growth end, they're going to go, nah, I don't believe in this stuff. Some people are just different and some people can really push back hard. Because what's happening in that situation is you're actually threatening their identity. The fixed mindset view of the world is a very, very comfortable view of the world. Like if you had a fixed mindset, it provides you with an excuse for everything. It's just, if this is just the way I am, well, you can't blame me for not doing that, and I'll never be able to do that. I'm not cut out. It gives you an excuse for everything. And some people, particularly in their 40s, 50s, 60s, spend a lot of time living in that little comfortable bubble. And when you start pointing out that, well, no, maybe you're not right about it, the first thing that can happen is a really strong pushback. Ride through that as a school leader. Just ride through it, because the next emotion they experience is actually a big release. Because while they've been living in their bubble, they've said, I'm never going to be able to achieve that. And now once their bubble's burst, there's now go, actually, you mean that thing that I've suffered with all that time, I can do that? Yeah, you can. And it actually is very, very almost enlightening for some people. So the question was, how do you know where you are? Look at the continuum. Identify where you fall. It doesn't have to be super accurate. It's just not going to be at one end or the other. And then ask yourself, what experiences have left you here? What do you need to understand to help you move further forward? And recognize that there's going to be an emotional response in the process as well. And also, if you're introducing this to your school, do the same thing with your students, but then ask your teachers this question. I ask all of you to think about this now. When you look and find your students down the middle, ask yourself, what would your life be like in your classroom if you could move all those students just one notch to the right? Not all the way to the right, that's not going to happen. Just one notch. How much better would your learning outcomes be? How much easier would your teaching be? So there you go. What, another question there, Samuel?
Okay, there's another question here that's asking, how would one go about formulating a growth mindset professional development program for teachers? Where do we start?
Here we go.
With the workshop.
Where would you start? Yeah. Seriously. Hang on, I've got to come back here. It sounds flippant, but that's where you start. The work, what we've discovered, the things we've been doing in the last 10 years or so haven't worked. The things that we kind of intuitively think it should work, it doesn't. And we need to adopt a more sophisticated strategy. And that's what I've been spending the last 10 years working out. That's what I've been working with schools around Australia and New Zealand into Southeast Asia to help them develop those strategies. There is a version of this Growth Mindset Masterclass available to schools and regions, and I invite you to contact the Principals Academy to investigate that. But it's not a workshop. It's a planned approach to changing teachers' mindsets, changing policy and so forth as well. So I'd love to have a longer chat with whoever asked that question, because it's not something I would do without support.
We've heard you describe the cycle that we want to bring people through, whether it's students or ourselves, in terms of the explicit teaching. And you also talk about that when we are doing this work in shifting mindsets, we're actually touching on a very fundamental part of our identity, and that's why there's that emotional response. So I think in schools, we tend to think about it in terms of professional development programs. But it sounds like there's a lot of need for trusted relationships as well. Could you tell us a bit more about the importance of relationships in making this happen?
Yeah, look, my teaching career, when I was back in school, so I worked in a school that one of the mantras that we held was, I can't teach someone that I don't know well, and I can't know more than about 40 kids well. And that changed the structure of the school. So I only had to know about 40 or 50 students. That personal relationship that you develop with a student, the intimacy of knowing how they respond, the honesty of them being able to talk about their feelings and emotions, it's always going to be at the heart of any process, any effective learning process. So that growth mindsets aren't a silver bullet. They're not going to solve all your problems. And if you don't have other things in place, like those relationships with your students, a trusting, supportive environment, then don't do mindsets. Work on that part of your school culture. Get that part under control and then do this work. And when you do it, it's going to be so much more powerful. And I'll add one thing, and I know we're coming close to the end of our time. The three ideas I've talked about today, the growth mindset, habits of mind, and the virtuous practice, the thing I love about them is that they're observations. They're what people really do to achieve. It could be that we lived in a fixed mindset world, right? It could be that the world was actually full of people that were fundamentally different, and our job as teachers in that world would be diagnostic. It would be to find out what skills and abilities our students have, to funnel them to that path or that path or that path, because these students aren't capable of doing that. It just turns out that it's not the world we live in. The world we live in is actually one where we have free will. We get to choose. And if we choose the right sort of actions, we're capable of becoming whoever we choose to become. And that part is the part that's really at the heart of this. It's where I started, and I said it's about the exercise of free will. Fundamentally, someone with a growth mindset gets that they're capable of choice. Someone with a fixed mindset says, I can never choose. And when we develop more growth-oriented mindsets in students, what we're doing is giving them the greatest gift of all, which is the ability to choose their own path in life, rather than live in a world where they see boundaries and limits around each other, around themselves. So look, thank you to everyone who's come along today. Thank you to the Principals Academy for hosting this. And thank you, Samuel, to you for emceeing the day. I really hope that I get the opportunity to work with many of you in the Growth Mindset Masterclass, because I really do believe this is part of the work that is at the absolute core of what it means to be a teacher. So Samuel, I'll let you wrap up, but thank you very, very much.
Thanks, James. I am getting a lot of questions in the chat about more administrative stuff as well. So somebody's asking, is the QR code working? It doesn't lead me anywhere. Is anybody having issues with the QR code? No? Okay. All right, so...
yeah, I couldn't...
Okay, so James has got the QR code up again. Okay, somebody else needs the QR code again, and there it is. And there's another question about the dates for the masterclass. May I check if the dates for the primary live webinars are reflected correctly? The fourth session is 3rd November.
Oops, let me just grab that one again.
3rd December again, yeah.
Yeah, so let me go to, yeah, there you go. So that's the dates that I think we've got right. Are they right? I hope they're right. So we've got two groups, one for primary teachers and one for secondary teachers, and they're scheduled to align with your last week before the end of before the beginning of the non-teaching period.
Okay.
And if they're wrong, we'll send you out the right ones.
Right. So, okay, it sounds like some people are okay with QR codes, but some are not. I think once you fill in the feedback forms and we have your email addresses, I think the organizers will be able to send you all the information that I think has been flashed on the slides. So that should take care of the admin issues. Yeah.
And there is also, Samuel, down the bottom there, this is the one that's on screen now is for the feedback form, and that'll give you the notes and resources, and the URL is down the bottom there. So I'm just going to stand in front of it because it'll, oh no, it doesn't, makes it worse when I do that. What if I do that? Does that make it easier to read or worse?
Is it the color? I'm not sure. Some people are saying it's because it's in orange. I'm not sure if it's the background. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Frida, for sending the link.
See if I can change. See, I can do this. Let's see if I can do that. That might make it easier. Cool. All right. I think are we wrapping it up, Samuel? Or, I'm happy to stay and answer questions, but it all seems.
Okay. Joseph, do we wrap up?
Yes, I mean, thank you very much. We have a call to an end for the webinar.
Right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I hope it's been informative and a thought-provoking session. My own takeaway is that there is a lot of self-work that needs to be done, a lot of reflection for myself first, and I think for all of us as teachers to examine our practice and to see where we really are on that spectrum, and from there, how we can work with our students. Yeah, so thank you very much for joining us today, and you'll be receiving the information in your emails together with all the material from James as well. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Hey, Samuel, can you still hear me?
I'm listening. Yes, I can.
That's right. Siri thought I was talking to her as well. There she goes again. I just wanted to say thank you. You've done a great job today, and certainly the faces I could see and can still see seem to be paying close attention and enjoying it. The faces I can still see, did you get a lot out of today? Give me a thumbs up if you're still on screen and enjoyed something today. Yeah, good stuff. I can see. Oh God, I'm struggling to pronounce some of the names, but I can see the thumbs, which is a good thing. So yeah, look, I would love to spend some more time working with these teachers. It's so rewarding just to have so many people show up and be interested in what this is about, and to be focused on developing growth mindsets in their students, and to be asking themselves the challenging questions about, you know, how do you do it well? Like, there's the simple shortcuts, the social media stuff, but it just doesn't work. And if you want to make a real difference, you've got to take a more sophisticated approach. And that's just, it would be nice if it was easier, if we could just put the posters up. But if it were easy, we would have done it, you know?
Yeah, there were quite a number of questions that we didn't manage to get to. I don't think we even covered half the questions.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I was just conscious of the time. But if you'd like, what I can do, if you capture those questions now and send them to me, I can, group them together a bit, and maybe between now and November, I'll do half a dozen videos answering the questions, and you can send them back out to people and say, hear some of your questions answered, and the workshop's still coming up in November.
Okay. I think Joseph will be able to capture the questions. To everyone who's still here and from Singapore, I'm not with the academy. I am a teacher in a school and just helping to facilitate this. So because there were a couple of questions directed at me, so I'm not going to be the one getting back to you. It's going to be Joseph. Yeah, so he will have all the information, and I think he can send it to you via email.
Yes, thank you, everybody. We will consolidate the questions and send to James for his answering. And we will send back to you. And for now, I will ask I'll probably to remove you from chat room, or if you can do so now, so that we can have a debrief between the moderators and the speaker. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Could you hear the storm that came through here when in the middle of the session? It's about 9 degrees outside, and we had a thunderstorm come through during the session. It was.
Oh, okay. There was a part where your audio got very distorted.
Yeah. That's not good.
It was about 10 to 15 seconds. And then it came back, and when it came back, there was a slight lag between the screen and the sound, which lasted through the end. But I mean, I don't think it affected the learning.
I don't know what causes that.
Could have been the storm, I guess.
Certainly. Maybe. Yeah, it's happened once before, though. Is it happening now? Is there a lag now?
Let me see.
So if I'm talking away, is it matching or not?
No, there's
I'm just talking to sleep.
There's like a 1 second lag between the visual and the audio.
Let me try something. I'm going to turn my camera off, which runs the sound, and then I'm going to turn it back on and see if that fixes it. All right. Has that helped at all? Am I back in sync now?
No.
1, 2, 3. I am.
No, you're not. It's still about the same 1 second off.